Good morning. I'm Joe Fryer. Good to have you with us on this Monday.
Yeah, I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you had a great weekend. We begin this morning with President Biden's visit to the UK and the start of a big week in Europe that'll see the president also travel to Lithuania for that key NATO summit.
The president is due to arrive in Windsor this morning for his first meeting with King Charles since the monarch was crowned. The president missed the coronation back in May, but was there for the Queen's funeral last year. Earlier this morning, the president met with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in London to discuss the war in Ukraine. The talks came just days after the U.S. controversially agreed to send cluster bombs to Kyiv. See, more than 100 countries, including the U.K., have signed on to a convention that bans the weapons from being used. Speaking to CNN, the president defended his decision to supply those bombs.
It's not an easy decision, and it's not. We're not signatories to that agreement, but it took me a while to be convinced to do it. But the main thing is they either have the weapons to stop the Russians now keep them from stopping the Ukrainian offensive through these areas, or they don't. And I think they needed them.
In just a few moments, we're going to hear from NBC News military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs. But first, let's get to NBC News foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald, who joins us from Windsor. Megan, good morning. So we know the president's set to arrive at Windsor Castle shortly to meet with King Charles. What can we expect from that meeting?
Yeah, guys, good morning. Good to be with you. You're absolutely right. We are expecting the president to arrive here at Windsor Castle within the next 30 minutes or so. When he arrives, we know that he's going to be received by the king in the quadrangle of the castle, which is just behind me here. There will be the honor guard who will give the royal salute, and they'll play the U.S. national anthem. Then we suspect that the two will go inside the castle. They'll have tea. They're likely to discuss climate change. Now, of course, this is an issue that is near and dear to the king's heart, something he has been advocating for more than 5 decades now. We know the president has commended him on his efforts over the years. And the two will meet for the first time since Charles has been king. As you remember, President Biden did not attend the coronation in May, something that we don't typically see of United States presidents. Instead, President Biden sent his wife, Jill Biden. Guys.
So, Megan, as we mentioned, the president already met with Britain's prime minister earlier this morning. They, of course, talked about the Ukraine war ahead of this week's NATO summit. What was this meeting like for the president after that controversial decision to send those cluster bombs, something that Sunak says he discourages?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're talking about a fundamental difference here. Now, we know the United Kingdom is one of more than 100 nations that have signed that convention banning the use of cluster munitions. Now, the United States is not signed on to that convention, though the majority of its European allies are. So it's a difference here. But we have heard from the president on CNN talking about how it was a difficult decision for him to come to that conclusion, to send these cluster munitions, which have the ability to kill civilians, which is part of what makes it controversial. But nevertheless, we know that the two discussed Ukraine, their fierce support in helping Ukraine be victorious in this war.
And Megan, we know Ukraine's bid to join NATO could be discussed at this NATO summit. I mean, this issue really is somewhat divisive right now, especially between the U.S. and the U.K., right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, we have heard from Rishi Sunak's foreign minister who stood in support of Ukraine's mission to become part of NATO. In fact, he said that he wants to see this fast track, similar to what we saw for Finland in joining NATO. But the United States has a different posture there. The president doesn't believe that now is the time for Ukraine to join NATO. But also, we know that President Zelensky was given the invitation to attend the summit tomorrow in Lithuania. Will he be there? We don't yet know. But should he attend, we know that he's going to be going hard after this commitment that NATO has said back in 2008 that one day NATO will receive Kyiv. And so he wants to see some progress on that. But I want to play for you now a little bit of what President Biden said on CNN. Take a listen.
I don't think it's ready for membership in NATO. I think we have to lay out a path, for the rational path, for Ukraine to be able to qualify to get into NATO. And we have, when the very first time I met with Putin 2 years ago in Geneva, and he said, I want commitments on no Ukraine in NATO. I said, we're not going to do that because it's an open door policy.
So, guys, look, all eyes are certainly going to be on this convention as it kicks off, or on this summit, rather, when it kicks off tomorrow in Lithuania.
All right, Megan, reporting from Windsor. Thank you so much.
Let's now bring in Colonel Jack Jacobs on this. Hi, Colonel. Thanks for being with us. So I want to start by playing some sound. This is from Congresswoman Barbara Lee criticizing this move by the Biden administration to send those cluster bombs to Ukraine. Let's listen to her speaking on CNN.
What I think is that we would risk losing our moral leadership, because when you look at the fact that over 120 countries have signed the Convention on cluster munitions, saying they should never be used, and in fact, many of us have urged the administration to sign on to this convention. And so I'm hoping that the administration would reconsider this, because these are very dangerous bombs, they're dangerous weapons, and this is a line that I don't believe we should cross.
Colonel, what do you make of this decision?
Well, it was a very difficult decision, at least partially because of the fact that our allies, by and large, have signed on to the pact. But there's something to keep in mind. Two things, actually. The first is all of Ukraine is full of unexploded munitions, and when the war is over, they'll all have to be cleared. They're a danger both to soldiers and to civilians, and the place is full of them. The second thing is that the dud rate, the percentage of munitions that are unexploded, for the American side, for our munitions, about 2%. The Russian dud rate is about 35 or 40%. And it is difficult to envision how the Ukrainians are going to be able to pursue their defense in a situation in which they have a dwindling supply of munitions, artillery, rockets, and so on, to defend themselves. And the production has not kept pace with use. It was a difficult decision, but the correct one.
Colonel, do you think, and this sort of seems like it's potentially what you're referencing there at the end, that kind of the progress of what we're seeing here with Ukraine's counteroffensive factored into this? Is this a desperation move?
Well, desperation is too much of a word, but it is slow going for the Ukrainians. Don't forget that when you attack, you have to have a 3-to-1 ratio against the defenders. It is much easier to defend than to attack. And the Ukrainians, secondly, have been looking for places in the line that will yield to a counteroffensive, and so far they haven't found it. They've been fighting around Bakhmut still, and so it's very difficult for the Ukrainians with dwindling ammunition supplies and a very difficult defense, a tough defense that has taken the Russians a long time to develop. It's very difficult for the Ukrainians to breach that. So it's not surprising that the Ukrainians have had a hard time. They have a very short period of time to actually make some progress before the winter's coming up. Before the winter sets in, it becomes even more difficult, Savannah.
All right. Colonel Jack Jacobs, always great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Sure.
The U.S. military says it killed an ISIS leader in a drone strike on Friday in eastern Syria. In a statement, CENTCOM said the death will, quote, disrupt and degrade ISIS's ability to plan and conduct terror attacks. However, CENTCOM's operations against ISIS, alongside partner forces in Iraq and Syria, will continue in order to achieve the group's enduring defeat. CENTCOM added it was assessing reports of a civilian injury.
We're going to turn now to the severe weather sweeping the country. At least 42 million people across the East Coast were under flood watches this weekend. Here in New York, catastrophic flash floods led to at least one death Sunday night, and officials warn there may be more rain to come. This was the scene you're seeing on your screen right now in Orange County. That's about 60 miles north of New York City. Governor Kathy Hochul has declared a state of emergency for the area as crews continue rescue missions for a lot of people that are stranded in their homes and cars. According to the National Weather Service, the total amount of rainfall could rival the remnants of Hurricane Irene.
To the west, strong storms are continuing to cause widespread damage. Colorado was hit with more hail over the weekend, some of it the size of baseballs. National Weather Service issued several warnings for high winds and severe thunderstorms. And in the south, we've said it before, we'll say it again, no relief in sight. Temperatures there still soaring in the triple digits. Record heat is expected from Arizona to Florida. And experts warn this heat wave could be the worst in history. Let's take a closer look at how all this unpleasant summer weather could be impacting your week ahead. Time for your Morning News Now weather forecast.
That means Michelle Grossman joins us with all the details. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, guys. Great to see you. And we are going to continue to watch that flash flooding, potentially life-threatening in portions of New England, specifically northern Vermont. Burlington, you're included in that. Also watching the chance for really strong storms throughout the Central Plains, the Southern Plains, parts of the Midwest. And yes, we are watching that continuing heat wave. So let's start with radar in the Northeast. You can still some really heavy rain is falling. That's the brighter colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows. And we're going to continue to see this today, not only today, but also tomorrow. It's sort of just training over the area. We have a very strong cold front that's moving through. It's kind of interacting with some tropical moisture. And that's why we're seeing these really heavy downpours. And this is the scenario we're going to watch all day long, just kind of pluming over the same area. And Vermont, you're going to be in the bullseye of some really heavy rain. So as we're looking at flood watches, flash flood warnings, the flash flood warnings are in red. You see a lot of them. That means flooding is happening now or it is imminent. So that is a very dangerous situation. You want to get to higher ground if you have to. Heed any of your local warnings. 27 million people at risk. We do have a flood watch for most of New England and portions of eastern New York, also parts of Pennsylvania as well. That's going to lead to the chance of some flash flooding. Where you see that light pink color, this is really where we have a high risk for flash flooding. That's intense 2-inch-per-hour rainfall rates, and that includes Burlington. Moderate risk is in that pink color, and that's going to be a big scenario as we go throughout the day. We're looking anywhere from 1, 2, 3, but possibly up to 5 inches. Even some spots could see up to 7. That's over saturated grounds, and that's going to create some problems there. So that's in portions of the Northeast. We're also watching some strong storms in the Midwest, into the Central Plains, the Southern Plains, a big area here. 9 million people at risk. We're going to see really gusty winds at 65 miles per hour. Large hail as well. That could cause damage. A few tornadoes are possible. And then look what happens tomorrow. It doesn't go very far. That's another front that's sort of parked over the area. So it's the same area that's going to see strong storms once again tomorrow. Portions of Nebraska, Iowa, the yellow shading is where we're going to see those strong storms. And then ending it with that heat once again. We're looking at millions once again under excessive heat warnings. 32 million people impacted. Temperatures into the triple digits. El Paso has seen 24 straight days of over 100-degree temperatures. That's a lot.
So the forecast is just like, it doesn't stop. It's just days and days and days of hot temperatures.
It doesn't stop and it doesn't move.
Yeah.
Oh my
it's just
gosh.
parked.
Yeah. Oh, so important to stay safe during all this. Michelle, thank you so much.
Sure.
Well, this morning, several cities are still reeling from mass shootings over the weekend. In Ohio, police are searching for a suspect who opened fire on a group of people in Cleveland. In all, 9 were hurt. The suspect took off, and police say that investigation is ongoing. Meanwhile, in New York City, a man riding a motorized scooter went on a shooting rampage. 1 person was killed and 3 others were injured in that shooting. Police say the seemingly random attacks took place in Brooklyn and Queens Saturday morning. The alleged shooter was captured by police.
The federal grand jury that's probing former President Trump's efforts to stop the transfer of power after his 2020 election loss has heard from dozens of witnesses. That's according to an NBC News analysis. The investigation is examining Trump's conduct from the time before Election Day in 2020 through the January 6th attack on the Capitol in early 2021. Special counsel Jack Smith is leading that January 6th investigation into Trump. He's also the one who's looking into Trump's handling of classified materials. In that case, a grand jury in Miami indicted Trump last month on 37 counts, while the federal grand jury investigating January 6th is meeting in Washington.
Well, we got some news in the race for the White House over the weekend. The Iowa GOP just announced that it will hold the first in the nation Republican presidential caucus on January 15th. Many of the Republican candidates vying for the party's nomination have already been holding those events in Iowa, many in just the last week. Well, despite that large field of candidates, former President Trump maintains a large lead over his rival. This comes from our most recent NBC News poll. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Mark, always great to have you with us. Good morning. So candidates in recent years who have won the Iowa caucus have not actually gone on to win the GOP nomination, most recently Ted Cruz in 2016. But that being said, this particular race still holds a lot of significance. So just remind us of this now that we've got this date, the importance and then also some of those quirks of the Iowa caucus.
Yeah, Savannah, you're exactly right. You know, the history of the Iowa caucuses on the Republican side necessarily has not been a predictor of who goes on to win the Republican nomination. Not only did Ted Cruz end up winning in 2016, but you also had Mike Huckabee, who won in 2008, and Rick Santorum in 2012. But what the Iowa caucuses do for Republicans and also Democrats when they have a contest there as well is that it whittles the field down, that you end up going from a large field, as we end up seeing on the Republican side of a dozen or more candidates. And then once you end up having the contests in Iowa, then New Hampshire, and then South Carolina, you get down to 2 or 3 candidates, which makes it a lot easier for overall Republican primary voters to kind of make a decision on who they want to be president. And also, it's important to note that places like Iowa and New Hampshire have a lot of experience in kicking the tires on presidential candidates. They're usually small states and allow a lot of voter interaction with these candidates.
Mark, let's also talk through some of these candidates. We know Trump is the frontrunner for the nomination. That's been the case for a while now. But what does our polling tell us about the ranking of the rest of the field?
Yeah, there is an opening. And what our poll shows, when people are asked about second choice preference, you end up having that Ron DeSantis is kind of in that clear number 2 position. And then you have candidates like Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, as well as Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, all in kind of close in double digits in that second choice support, then followed by former Vice President Mike Pence. And so if your choice is not Donald Trump, then people are kind of kicking the tires on other candidates. But I still think that Donald Trump, that 51% number in the national primary, and remember, we don't really conduct a national primary, but our national poll, 51%, when you have half the party saying, hey, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, that's a big number with 6 months to go before the Iowa caucuses.
Absolutely. And speaking of Trump, he was on the campaign trail this weekend, taking parts in events in Iowa, later in Nevada. What did we hear and see?
Yeah, it was a busy weekend for the former president. First, he was in Iowa on Friday, where he ended up attacking Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on agricultural issues. And then on Saturday, he ended up going to Nevada, where he ended up speaking at a church. And then he ended up attending a UCF fight where there were lots of cameras and interactions with some of the celebrities there.
Awesome. Mark Murray, thank you so much. Good to see you this morning.
For Republican presidential candidates, culture war issues have become a major talking point. On Meet the Press over the weekend, moderator Chuck Todd sat down with one candidate, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, to get his take on the topic. Here's Chuck.
Hello, Joe and Savannah. This week on Meet the Press, I got to sit down with Republican presidential candidate and Governor of North Dakota Doug Burgum, and I did it in Fargo to discuss his bid for the White House. Take a look at where he stands on this culture war debate.
I believe in states' rights. And I believe that the President of the United States has got a defined set of things they're supposed to work on, and it's not every culture war topic.
So you're not going to sign any abortion bills, you're not going to say any transgender bills, you're going to stay out of every cultural issue if you get elected president?
Anytime that, when I was in the private sector and I had a chance to start from the tiniest startup, less than 10 people, build that into a 2,000-person company, I then had an opportunity to work at large global companies. Anytime you're the CEO, if you're spending time on something that can be done, in a, sales office, out on the front lines dealing with customers, you're not doing your job. You got to be looking to the future. We need a president that's focused on the challenges that we're being faced as a nation, not a president that's going to decide whether a book is in the right section or not in a library in a small town somewhere in America. That is and that's part of what was going wrong now. The reason why we've got issues with our economy, with our energy policy, with national security that are just raft is because we are somehow, through culturally, media, whatever, trapping the presidency or expecting them to weigh in on every single thing. It's not the place that a CEO should be spending their time. It's definitely not the place where the president should be spending their time.
It's a little bit different than what you hear in the day-to-day of the Republican primary campaign. You can see my full interview with him at MeetThePress.com. You can also get a lot more Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now every single weekday at 4 p.m.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.